So we learned how to test containers, and I mentioned that the important part is that you don't test the connection to Redux. How do you test Redux then? Do you test it at all? The answer is yes, we test it, but we have to be careful about what we test. We probably don't want to test very complex chains of actions and reducers and state. In the end, the reducers are the meat we want to test, especially if we follow the pattern of not putting too much logic in the action creators. Then, testing reducers is super simple. They're synchronous, so we don't have to deal with async code, and they're just functions. We pass something in, we get something out. Like for example, for authentication. Let's say we want to write a test for this. So I'll add a auth.test.js file. Here we don't even need enzyme because we're not testing any React components. We don't need to render anything. We just test normal JavaScript code. We test functions, the reducer function. So what I just do here is in the test file, I first of all import the reducer function from ./auth.js in this file, in this case, like that. And now I also need to import the action types. So as action types, I import everything from ./actions action types. And now we just write the test. So again, with describe, I now give this a clear description we can see in the console, like the auth reducer. And then in the function here, we can write the many tests we have. Obviously, we can again use before each to do some general configuration if we need to. But I want you to start right with the tests. So and now let's see what we test. Let's for example test that we get the right initial state if we actually pass an invalid action type to it. So it should return the initial state. Could be the description here. And then I pass my JavaScript function. And in there, I now expect my reducer if I execute it. So now inside expect, I simply execute the code I want to test, just as before with wrapper, but now with a normal JavaScript function. And it will actually pass undefined here as an initial state. That is the case when the state is just getting set up at the beginning of our app. And the action is just an empty object, so no specific action. So in this case, I expect my state to equal, and now it should equal my initial state defined in the reducer function, of course. So this JavaScript object. That is exactly what I test for. It should equal that object. Now if we save that file, this should be executed too, and it is, auth.test.js is executed. So there we now see that that is successful, and this is how easy you can test a reducer. Of course, you can also test for specific cases. So we can write another test where it should store the token upon login. And now in this function here, I actually expect to execute the reducer function with, let's say, the initial state, and we could set this up in before each. So I execute the reducer function with the initial state and with action where the type is action types of success. And now, of course, we need to pass the correct payload with that action here too. So not only the type, but also the payload of that action. And we can see that payload, of course, in our action creators file. In auth success, we also pass ID token and user ID. So that is something we should pass on here too. And that could be some token. The exact value, of course, doesn't matter for the test. And some user ID. Now that is the reducer function, how we execute it. Now we expect it to spit out an updated state which respects this token and user ID. So the updated state should equal our initial state in general, but the token, of course, should be some token. And here that has to be the exact value here. If it weren't, then something would be wrong inside our reducer. That's the idea behind testing. The user ID should therefore be some user ID. Now if we save this, this also passes. And as soon as I change the expected value to some user, it fails, because now we have differing values. So this is how we can also test reducers. They're pure functions and therefore very simple to test.